to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, a moment of silence for our men and women in uniform who are working here and abroad, for our police and fire department here in our community to keep us safe, for those first responders on the job since we have entered into the pandemic era, and also for those who have been directly hit with the virus. Please be seated. So we have good news in that this evening we are going to swear in a police officer. Let's see. And he is Michael Perone. So Michael, will you please come forward?
Well, before we do that, Mayor, Mr. Jackson, could you give a little bio on the cardio? Thank you, Mayor and Trustee. Just wanted I'm proud to present Michael Perone. He's a 9-year veteran in NYPD. He worked in two very busy precincts, the 77 precinct, and for the last 8 years in the 105 precinct. He has received 2 excellent duty awards and 2 Prophet of Month awards. So he sounds like a very good asset for our police department. He also has a bachelor's degree from, if I say this right, Luca College upstate, and a dual master's in education and special education in Toronto College. So I present to you Michael Perone. Thank you, Commissioner. Wow. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Michael Perone,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York
and the Constitution of the State of New York
and the laws and ordinances of the Village of Garden City.
and the laws and ordinances of Garden City,
And that I will faithfully discharge
and I will faithfully discharge
the duties of a police officer
the duties of the police officer
with the Garden City Police Department
with the Garden City Police Department
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
By the powers vested in me as Police Commissioner of the Village of Garden City, I declare you duly appointed. Congratulations.
Yeah.
time, we return to reports from members of the executive staff, and we begin with Commissioner Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. I do not have anything else on the agenda. I just want to mention, very quickly, this time of year, we stress safety. When you leave your house, when you go to the store, it's darker now, it's the holiday. Incidents of burglary and loss of cars and other serious crimes usually creep up at this time of year. So we ask everybody to make sure they use their alarms, they leave their lights on, that they have their ring cameras or surveillance cameras, make sure they're activated at all times. We'll be putting it out probably next week. But please just take good care and have a safe holiday. That's all I have.
Thank you for your comments. Chief Driscoll.
Thank you, Mayor. I have an agenda. Just want to wish everyone a happy holiday and happy Thanksgiving.
Mr. Giovanni.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I don't have anything on the agenda, but I just want to give the board just an update on the capital project for the digital scanning. We're approaching about 95-96%, and hopefully reach it upon completion towards the next month or so. Hopefully we get that resolved by the end of the year. Also, just a friendly reminder on the property request, the folder property request. That deadline is approaching. It's the 31st of December. Hopefully, just a reminder. I believe to date, 3,500 has been picked up. Between 3,500 and 4,000 have been picked up. I'm still holding between 500 and 600 in the office. So just a reminder, if you do call and request, please come on and pick them up. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Mrs. Booth.
Thank you, Mayor. Usually I usually give an update to the board on the current financial situation of the village. Better? Thank you. I usually give an update to the board on the current financial information to the village. But last night I was invited to the estate POA meeting where they asked me to present comprehensive financial information about the village, especially in light of the fact of the global pandemic and its financial impact to the village. So I was asked to do that same presentation tonight, so that will be a little bit more comprehensive tonight. Some of the information that I presented last night has been presented to the board in previous board meetings, so I apologize in advance if some of you have heard this information already, but there seems to be some questions surrounding the finances of the village, and so hopefully this information will answer some of those questions. So here we go. So as many of you are aware, right, so COVID had an effect on the village locally sometime around mid-March. March is the start of the fourth quarter of the fiscal year for the village. The village's fiscal year begins June 1st and ends May 31st of every year. So I'm going to begin by giving a brief overview of how the village ended the fiscal year 2019-20, that ended on May 31st. And I'll cover all the major funds of the village. The major funds of the village, I'm sorry? Is there a question? No. Oh, I'm sorry. The general fund is the major operating fund of the village. That's where all the major departments are covered. The Department of Public Works, Building Department, Police, Fire, Recreation, Finance, Administration. The general fund revenues are mostly funded through real property tax revenues. That's about 83 to 84% of the revenues come from real property taxes. The remainder of the revenues come from departmental income. The building department collects permit fees. The police department and court receive revenues through parking tickets that are issued. The recreation department has recreational programs. They have field rentals and facility rentals. We receive state aid, and we receive a slew of other miscellaneous revenues. If you come to Village Hall and purchase, a railroad parking ticket, that's revenue to the village. We have a lot of those miscellaneous revenues. The other funds that the village has are enterprise funds. That means that the operating revenues are used to cover the operating expenses for that particular fund. So the cost of services are really paid through user fees. So the enterprise funds the village has are the water fund, the pool fund, and the tennis fund. So tonight I'll cover all these funds for the village. So if we look at the 1920 fiscal year, the general fund received $60.8 million in revenues. That's out of a budget of $65 million. So that's about a $4 million shortfall from the budget. But the vast majority of that shortfall pertained to deferred revenues. There were 3 major projects, and I'll go through those projects. The first one was the Business District Paving project. That project was anticipated to start in the 1920 fiscal year and to have received reimbursements from the business district for the cost of that project. That project was deferred. The second project was the Nassau Boulevard train station project. As many of you probably have seen, that project is well underway. It's almost completed. And that project is being reimbursed by the MTA Community Benefit Fund. We've already submitted about $800,000 to that fund for reimbursement this year. The third project is the 555 Stewart Avenue project. That project was budgeted, and it was anticipated that that project would get started in the 2019-20 fiscal year. But the plans changed, and the project was deferred to this year. So that accounts for those deferred revenues. However, the village did see losses as a result of COVID. Since the village facilities closed in March, recreation programs were canceled, field rentals were canceled. In addition, as we remember, early March, it was pretty much the lockdown. Businesses were closed, and so there was very little traffic in the village, which resulted in a lot less parking tickets issued, which is good for, residents or whoever used to get parking, tickets, but that also resulted in lower revenues for the village as well. So the total cost of the loss of revenues for the village for the 1920 fiscal year as a result of COVID was about $700,000. Fortunately, there were all other revenue items that came in higher than anticipated. The village bonded back in February and received premium on securities. That was not budgeted, and the village received some funding there, some revenues there. We also received greater state aid than we anticipated, which was a good news for us. And we also received more forfeiture of deposits than anticipated. And these items were about $600,000 more than anticipated. So they basically almost offset the losses due to COVID on the general fund. So although there was a budget shortfall in revenues, the $60.8 million in revenues received was sufficient to cover the operating expenses. Operating expenses in the general fund were $60.6 million. Just like revenues, the expenses also came in lower than budgeted. We had savings in salaries, benefits, and taxes as a result of open positions in various departments of the village throughout the year. We also had less part-time help and less overtime incurred. Some of these savings were also as a result of COVID, right? Because with the cancellation of a lot of the recreation programs, less part-timers were hired. There were cancellation of events, parades, and special events in the village, which, you know, incurred overtime for certain employees. So those expenses also were less than anticipated. So the net effect on the general fund was that since the revenues exceeded the expenditures, by $200,000, that went into the village's surplus or reserve. So that was good for the village. On the enterprise funds, you know, the pool really did not see an impact due to COVID because the revenues received were for the 2019 summer. So they didn't see that fund didn't see an impact. The tennis fund, however, did see an impact due to COVID since the facility was closed in March. And so the loss of revenues for the tennis fund was about $100,000. We also, you know, was slightly offset by lower expenditures since, you know, the part-timers were needed, but it wasn't enough to cover the $100,000 loss. The water fund did not see an impact due to COVID. However, the revenues did come in about $500,000 less than budgeted, but that was as a result of lower water consumption and usage for the fiscal year as compared to the prior year. The 2019 fiscal year saw about a 3% reduction in water consumption, and that's mostly as a result of weather. When there's a rainy season, you know, less water is utilized. But for the water funds, on the flip side, they also had lower expenditures as a result of open positions in that fund. So overall, for the village's major funds, the village entered the 2019-20 fiscal year very favorably, even though we had impacts due to COVID. Now for the new fiscal year that began June 1st, I'll just give you a little background on the budget development. So on a normal year, typically, we begin the budget development 6 months in advance. So typically, December of every year, we start formulating and developing the budget for the next fiscal year that begins June 1st. There's a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions with the department heads in terms of putting together their budgets. It's consolidated, and then it's presented in public to the board and the public in March. We typically have about 4 public work sessions, and after discussions and review of the budget and adjustments, and once the board approves the budget, it's adopted in early to mid-April every year. This year, as a result of COVID, we had, I believe, our first only one public work session in March, and then, you know, COVID hit, the buildings closed, everything closed. And we then subsequently held our budget work sessions via Zoom calls. I'm not sure if anyone here attended any of those Zoom calls, but we had double amount of meetings. We had at least 8 meetings. They were very lengthy discussions. They were 2 to 3 hours long. There were very lively, intense discussions, talking about the budgets with a lot of emphasis on the capital projects. There were various iterations of the budgets that were presented. There were numerous models and scenarios that were discussed. In March, it was, the start of COVID, and it was very difficult to kind of know what the impact to the village would be, the financial impact to the village would be due to COVID. So we adjusted the budget as best as we could, after all those meetings, the budget was finally adopted on April 28th. Legally, it had to be adopted before May 1st, but it was adopted with the understanding that the Board of Trustees made it clear that, it was being adopted with the understanding that, we would monitor the budget closely, and the Board of Trustees would make adjustments to the budget as deemed necessary in the future months as time goes on. And so we have been monitoring and presenting the budgets regularly to the board. We've been discussing the budgets, and as a matter of fact, in one of the board meetings in October, the list of bonded capital projects came up, and it was thoroughly discussed, and a couple of projects on that list were deferred to next year. So that's a little bit of background on what goes on with the budget development, especially this year. That was a bit unusual. And so I'll start by going over this year's budget, which covers June through the end of September. So on the general fund side, the village received $58 million of revenue so far for the first 4 months of the budget of the year, out of a budget of about $64.5 million. So that's about 90% of revenues received this year versus 85% for the same period last year. So this year, the village has received more revenues than the prior year. And this is a result of 2 projects. One, the building department received building permit fees for the building on 1111 Franklin Avenue. That's the building that formerly housed Sears. During the budget development, that project was not anticipated, and so that that the village received $1.9 million. That was not anticipated in the budget. The second project is the project I mentioned earlier, 555 Stewart Avenue, the project that was deferred to this year. The developers came up with a different plan, and as a result of the new plans, the calculation of the building permit fees increased by $500,000. Again, that was not known at the time the budget was being developed, and so the village received, again, $500,000 more than it anticipated. So in total, the village already has received $2.4 million, greater than the budgeted revenues that it was anticipating. So hopefully these gains will offset any current and most likely future losses due to COVID for the village. Through September, the losses as a result of COVID are estimated to be about $500,000. Again, these are lost revenues in the recreation department and lost revenues from tickets, from parking tickets, traffic tickets, sorry. Also, the village, interestingly enough, due to COVID, there must be a lot more people working from home, less commuters, because there were a lot less railroad parking tickets sold this year versus last year. On the expenditure side, through September, the village has $29.5 million of expenditures out of a budget of $65.4 million. 45% of the budget has been expended this year versus 43% the same period last year. So generally, overall expenditures, when we dive down deeper into the expenses are trending similarly to last year and against the budget, what was anticipated, for the exception of 2 items. One are COVID-related expenditures. So the village has been incurring expenditures related to COVID. It's been purchasing a lot of PPEs, right? Gloves, masks, disinfectant sprays, wipes to protect the employees and the visitors to the village facilities. Also, the village has hired outside companies to come and disinfect and spray, the village facilities on occasion, as well as for highly utilized vehicles, such as police vehicles. They've done that a few times. The village has also purchased and installed plexiglass and other barriers to protect the employees and visitors to village facilities, so that incurred a cost as well. And lastly, the village has also seen an increase in overtime expenses as a result of some of it cleaning costs, but also to help support the outdoor dining initiative. As you know, the restaurants have restrictions on indoor dining, so they developed this outdoor dining initiative, and some overtime is required of the village to support that initiative. So for this fiscal year through September, we've seen about $125,000 of COVID-related expenses. But since the start in March, if we look at all the expenditures since the beginning through today, right, to date, the village has incurred about Now, early on, the federal government has declared COVID an emergency and instructed FEMA to assist municipalities in seeking reimbursement for COVID-related costs. We have been working diligently and very closely with our representative from FEMA early on to submit these expenses for reimbursement. Our first submission to FEMA, we submitted $40,000 worth of costs. And to this date, we have not received anything from FEMA. They have contacted us repeatedly asking for yet more information, asking more questions. It's been a long, tedious process. Sometime in July, early August, we were told that the town of Hempstead received funding through the CARES Act to help villages, reimburse villages for the COVID-related costs. So since then, since August, early August, we've been working with the town of Hempstead. We've submitted applications and we've submitted hundreds of documents, hundreds of pages of documents, of backup documentation supporting all the expenditures that the village has incurred related to COVID. And very excited to report that yesterday morning I was informed that at Tuesday night's town board meeting, they approved the village for a grant in the amount of $221,000 to reimburse us for costs related to COVID. So we were very excited about that. We'll continue working with them to receive that reimbursement. They unfortunately did notify us that they will not be reimbursing any overtime-related expenses. So for those, we have to continue working with FEMA to get reimbursement through them. The disadvantage of FEMA, besides being such a tedious, long process, they only reimburse up to 75% of your costs. The town of Hempstead, though, reimburses 100% of your costs. So, we're more excited to get reimbursed through the town of Hempstead, but either way, we will continue working with both FEMA and the town of Hempstead throughout the end of this calendar year, December 31st, which is when the period ends for reimbursements.
Mr. I have a question, sorry.
Yes.
You made a comment with regards to the ticket revenue being down. Is that a case of the courts getting caught up? So the tickets are there, the revenue's there, it just hasn't been recognized yet, the tickets haven't been processed, or is it just a volume of that?
I was discussing this with the police commissioner. It is the percentage of tickets that were issued that are a lot lower as a result of less traffic, and perhaps the commissioner has those, percentages or has better information to.
The trustee in the beginning, there was less traffic, the way it was used in the park fields. The ticket volume went way down. But we have seen an uptick. Traffic tickets are very close to normal levels at this time. Parking tickets are up about 80%. Some of the parking lots are still not being utilized as much as they were. But we have seen a major uptick. The courts are now starting at least doing conferences. And they are, again, this month we're told they can't have our trials. And so that's one thing that's going against us. But they are now bringing a lot more money. And I believe this month we're going to see a lot more. I talked to the court clerk the other day. So it looks like we are approaching normal status as best as possible. And the court is starting to move forward also. So we should be seeing a lot better results.
So the second item, expense item that was not anticipated was Tropical Storm Isaias. As you probably all recall, that was a devastating storm for the village. There were so many trees that were down. Many of us were without power for many days. Through September, the village has incurred about $500,000 in costs related to that storm. And when we estimate the total costs of what we anticipate it will be to deal with the impacts of the storm, it will be more like $1.3 million in total. These costs relate to the removal and disposal of trees, tree stumps, the grinding of the tree stumps and removing of that, the debris, all the branches and leaves, removal of all of that, as well as the So, you know, that's an enormous cost to the village. Once again, this storm was declared an emergency, and FEMA is handling the, you know, reimbursements to village as a result of the storm. So we have submitted an application to FEMA, and we are barely in the beginning stages of that process with FEMA. So, you know, this brings me to one of the advantages that the village has is that the board over the years has made a concerted effort to ensure that the village has ample reserves. Not only does that help the village with a AAA rating, but it allows the village to be able to do these quick repairs when there are damages, things that are anticipated. The village is able to take care of that on a timely basis and not have to wait around for reimbursements from FEMA in order to, you know, get the work done. You know, the village saw this with the previous hurricanes and storms with Irene and Sandy. A lot of that work had to be done ahead of time, and the reimbursements didn't come to the village until much, much later. So with this storm, like I said, we've incurred already about $500,000 in costs, and anticipate that will increase more than double in the next couple of months. We will be coming to the board at a future board meeting to request utilizing some of the village's reserves to, you know, pay for some of these costs in anticipation of the FEMA reimbursements, which may or may not come within this fiscal year, before the end of this fiscal year. But it's good that, you know, the village has that resource. We, you know, we'll continue to monitor the budgets and report on that on future meetings as well. On the enterprise funds, the pool fund absolutely saw a major impact due to COVID. As you may remember, you know, the pool had a delayed opening. The Board of Trustees was waiting for the proper authorities to give the go-ahead to be able to open the pool. And then the board made the decision to open the pool for the season. At the delight of many residents. Many residents were very happy to have somewhere to go or have their kids, you know, go somewhere after, you know, being in lockdown for so many months. But as you know, due to the social distancing requirements, you know, there were many restrictions placed on the pool in terms of attendance, how many people could attend the pool at any given time. The hours of operation were cut short, and, you know, the delayed opening cut down the memberships a lot. Therefore, you know, the revenues for the pool fund were not, you know, nearly close to what it was anticipated on a normal year. So the revenues were about $950,000 short of the budget. On the flip side, you know, the expenditures were also lower than anticipated due to the delayed opening and the limited hours of operation. But not enough to cover the lower revenues that were received. The tennis fund continued to see a loss in revenues. The tennis fund facility didn't open until, I believe, mid-July. So it had 6 weeks of this fiscal year where it was not open. So through September, the tennis fund saw a loss of about $85,000 in revenues. Again, you know, it has seen lower expenditures. You know, there were no part-timers there during that time frame. But hopefully, you know, this will catch up for the tennis fund by the end of the year. The water fund is so far on track to achieve its revenue goals. And on the expenditure side, it's continuing to see lower expenditures than budgeted as a result of those open positions. So that's the overview of the operating expenses and revenues for the village on the major funds. I do want to touch a little bit on the capital projects fund. The village does have a separate capital projects fund. Capital projects can be funded through various sources, through taxes, through bonding, through reimbursements from outside sources, or through special grants that are given for special projects. The village has received all, funding from all these sources on projects. So the board has been very clear about addressing the village's infrastructure, improvements to its buildings, and purchasing of equipment, so as to not neglect those needs like they were many years ago. Many years ago, in an effort to keep expenses low or not increase expenses, the roads weren't paved as timely as they should have been. Equipment was, being used way past its useful life, resulting in higher maintenance costs. And a lot of the necessary improvements to buildings were just not done, which resulted now in a long list of projects, capital projects, that the village is facing at the moment. As I mentioned earlier, during the budget process, capital projects is always the most talked about and discussed item. There's so many needs, and it's always a challenge on figuring out, which projects to fund every single year, because there's always seems to be more need than ability, right? So, that's always something that's discussed thoroughly. It's important to note that capital projects don't necessarily start and end within a fiscal year, unlike the operating budget that ends with a fiscal year, and then you start the new fiscal year with a new operating budget. Capital projects can span multiple fiscal years, especially for the larger, more complicated projects like the replacement of the water tower. That's been going on for a couple of years. The well treatment projects, that's been going on for a couple of years. Capital projects span multiple fiscal years, and they can last over a year. At any given time, the village is always working on a long list of projects. There's always projects that the village is working on. You can drive around the village and see, a lot of active projects. Some projects you can't see, they're more internal, but the village always has a long list of projects, although they may be in various stages of completion. There could be some projects that are in the pre-planning phases, and there could be other projects that are in the, wrapping up and, completed phases almost, but there's a big span in between. There's always a long list of projects the village is working on. If I were to categorize the current list of projects that the village is working on, I would use these categories. I would say 38%, which is a lot, 38% of the projects are investments in roads, curbs, and sidewalks. This includes parking lots as well. So that's a large investment in that. 27% of the current investment is in building improvements. The village has so many buildings and facilities, and they're always in need of roof repairs, HVAC improvements, bathroom upgrades, improvements to the interior. One of the major projects that we're working on this year is in the library, the children's room project. That's one of the major projects this year for the library. Well, one of 3 major projects in the library this year. Another category is technology. The current investments is 12% of the investment is in technology. Whether this includes security infrastructure, putting cameras in all the village facilities, or purchasing of software for departments. There's currently 3 departments that have software projects going on: the Department of Public Works, the Buildings Department, and the Finance Department. There's also the computer room renovation project going on this year as well. Another category are vehicles and equipment. As I mentioned earlier, there's now a replacement schedule for equipment, and we try to keep to that. That's a replacement of vehicles in the police department and equipment throughout, different departments of the village. DPW has a lot of equipment, whether it be sanitation trucks or just other trucks. And the parks department as well has some pieces of equipment they purchase. And then the other category, it's like 12% of the investment in that category. The biggest projects in that category right now are the LED replacement projects. So we have a village-wide initiative of replacing LED lights. As you recall, a couple of years ago, the village upgraded the fields and community park. Right now, there's projects going on to replace the lighting at those fields with LED lights. So those are some major projects that are happening on the general fund side. On the water fund, as I mentioned earlier, we have the water tank project, replacement of that project going on. And then there's also the water well treatment projects. The Board of Trustees has been on the forefront of addressing this major problem, the 1,4-dioxane and other well contaminant problems in the water. So about 2 years ago, the initial estimates, this was brand new, replacing, getting these new water well treatments, they were brand new. The initial estimates for remediating these issues at those wells was about $50 million for the 6 well sites in the village. The estimate now is closer to $40 million. And 2 of the projects have already been approved by New York State for grants. So New York State has informed the village that it will provide $9 million to the village for the 2 of the projects. And the village intends to submit the remaining 4 projects to New York State for grants as well. The $9 million represents about 60% of the cost of the 2 wells. So that's a good solution there. In the meantime, in order to address these issues timely, the village is issuing bans, which are bond anticipation notes. They're short-term in nature, in order to obtain the funding necessary to remediate these problems in a critical fashion. Once the net cost to the village, once the village receives the grants and the net cost to the village is known, then we will be issuing long-term bonds to pay for these projects in the future. So, this is briefly how the Board of Trustees is addressing some of these capital needs of the village. And I think this, covers a lot of information tonight. I hope you find it helpful. And I'm here if you have any questions.
That was great.
That was great. I actually have a question. It might not be the flashiest of all topics, but we did lose a lot of trees in Sandy. We lost a lot of, ideas. What is the replanting schedule, if any, that we're on throughout? Lots of the streets around town are completely different without that canopy of trees, and it might take a while. I understand we don't replant 60-year-old, triumphant oaks or whatever, but what's the plan and what's the schedule of replanting when we lose trees?
You find me at a bit of a disadvantage with that number, but I do know that we have I think somewhere upwards of about 100 trees being planted, either in spring, probably in spring. We do budget every year through the Parks Department. The PSCG Western Nassau Transmission Project, which is coming to close around December 8th, they took down 3 or 4 trees over by the Chase Bank, and they'll be giving us about 20 green diameter trees. There'll be 2 or 3 we put by the Chase Bank, and the remainder we put on the mall between Stewart, where we've lost trees. So we are very conscious of the loss of trees. We take down ones that are damaged and have to come down. We replace ones that have to come down due to storms. So it's an ongoing thing. We have about 12,000 village trees. I'll try to get a better number for you for the next meeting.
Yeah,
I have a question about the premium on the bands. We receive a premium on the bands. Do they issue the fixed coupon?
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
One of the things that comes with our revenue shortfall was the premium that we received.
were for the water fund.
Right.
So if you're referring to the revenues on the general fund side, that's for the bonds that were issued. We also issued bonds for the general fund projects.
Okay. But one of the unanticipated revenue sources that we had, which made up that budget shortfall, was the premium we got on the vans,
On the bonds,
on the bonds.
yes.
Mr. Swazi?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. My comments are a little less than Ms. Wood. Item 5 on the agenda, we have a change order. As you know, the second floor is going through a renovation, and we had a new doorway into the building superintendent's door, and the masonry around the building repaired, so we need a change order of $1,200. That's the only agenda item I have, but I would have to talk about any other topic. If you have questions on it, I can answer.
You see a lot of tree stumps out there. Do you have any sense of where we are in the process of removing them? And again, I know you're probably grant on that one, but
So we lost a few trees during, and sidewalks during, I see the tropical storm, which I still can't pronounce. And let's see, thank you. And we did hire contractors to remove stumps. We put out work orders. A lot of the sidewalks repairs that occurred. I believe a lot of stumps are being taken out in front of them where they need to be. There might still be some residuals. There's about 50 to 60 work orders in play. Again, as was Trustee New's question, I'll give you the exact count or an email next couple of days where you know what the exact count is. But we're very aware of them. The ones that are storm related, we're hiring contractors, and that will go through the reimbursement process.
can you give us an update on the water tower?
I'm sorry,
On
sir?
the water tower? On the water tower.
The water tower. The water tower is currently the interior was sandblasted and the interior is being painted. Our consultants at H2M did inspection of the wells. You know, the wells are for structure, and they also have an impact on how long the paint job will last if they're not smooth. They found some deficiencies in the wells, and the contractor didn't agree with all of them. H2M brought in a third-party CWI, certified well inspector, who agreed with about 9% of them. So that is an ongoing discussion. I received a letter on it yesterday afternoon. I actually sent it to Mr. B late early this evening. We'll be discussing it in the next couple of days. We expect that resolved. We don't think it will impact the spring delivery date of the tank. Basically, if the welling unit remobilized back in, inspected to our satisfaction, and then they'll continue to paint.
It's not impacting the ability to paint the outside now? I mean, obviously.
No, it will, because when in fact, the area where the wells are on the outside that have to be re-welded or fixed, it will impact the paint on the inside because of the heat. So they'll have to spot paint wherever wells touch the paint on the inside. So it'll be done properly. So we can't do the outside till the well is.
So at this point, we're probably anticipating the spring, right?
Yes, it's always been a spring anticipation because once we get it all painted, the health department still has to step in and approve it. That'll probably be a few weeks, but we expect to have it online for the next summer season.
So, did you say before that we had how many thousand trees in the village?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I can't hear you.
How many thousand trees in the village?
There's about, from my recollection of past discussions, we have about 12,000 village trees on our inventory.
And that's what we always had. The level was 12. But over time, have we lost the number of trees?
I don't have trends, but we basically replace them. The residents like them replaced. We usually replace them. Today we try to replace them with more street-friendly trees where appropriate. We also have our own rounds. We also planted some new trees. We planted 60 trees today around the fire department monument. So we're constantly always planting trees. Also, we do Interactive National Grid and PSEG. They need some access, they need some permission to do some work over by Delphi recently. In exchange for permission, we had them commit to beautifying some bushes along the south end of the railroad track. So we're always looking at beautifying green spaces and keeping the count around 12,000. I can't give you the exact count at any moment.
In the very recent past, we used to get an award, I think Susie Allen's husband, I forget his first name, he would go to Hofstra for a convention, and at that we would get an award year after year calling us a tree village. And Great Neck also has that, and my husband and I worked there to have some seafood, and I noticed that they had a sign that said we're a tree village. It's very honored. So I was wondering, do we still get that? Are we still involved in that? Because that was only about 3-4 years ago when that was going on.
Yeah, I think it's called the Tree City USA program. There are certain criteria. You must have a beautification committee. You must plant a certain amount of trees. There are 3 or 4 criteria. I don't know if we slipped away and didn't have it last year, but I'll check with Mr. Blake.
Yeah, because I think it would be, if it's a matter of us sending somebody to meetings and a conference every once in a while, I think that, number one, we should be called a tree village, and also, if there is a sign, like an interesting sign attached to it, that we would put it up in the village where people enter and leave, because it is unique to put so much care into the trees. There are a lot of tree stumps, I think, along Cathedral Avenue. My husband and I, when we come up to the village, we use Cathedral, and you see that, yes, they took the tree down, but the stumps are still there. But that's something that we should hold on to, I think.
Yeah, it's a nice credential and recognition to have, but I want to assure you, Mayor, and the board and the residents here that even without the designation, we do put a lot into it, but we might slip on the criteria when we're able to get us back on.
Thanks. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, if you, Ralph, can I, maybe don't know offhand, but I want to make sure that we're following some procedures for its fall leaves. People are checking out the roofs of the different buildings, clearing out gutters, different buildings in the village. So make sure that that's being done. Make sure your team gets that done.
Yes, we actually do go up on the flat roofs and clear the drains there. I think once a month during fall season, which is good because we don't have flooding the roof. We don't want the water holding the roof and leaking. And we've also improved the storm drains around our buildings. So I think we're doing that. And we also replace the roofs with clean over gutters and replace the scuppers as we go along. So I think that's a process I can double check on that, but in my conversations.
Okay. And also, Paul's not here, but can we make sure that we're doing the routine maintenance on the fields, especially the artificial turf fields we put in? I don't know if they did anything this last fall in terms of, I'll call it combing it and getting new fill in it, and you gotta make sure that's kept up. So if it wasn't done this fall, let's make sure it gets done in the spring or something.
That's something I understand to be a scheduled thing, but I'll check with you.
Okay.
I also, it was mentioned earlier by Ms. Brewer, but Nassau Boulevard is substantially complete. There are light poles in the light pole posts in the middle of the parking field. The one on the western end is being raised 6 inches over the next couple of days. The lamp posts are back ordered. We expect them around December, but we check every week with the contractor. And the paving was delayed the last couple of days because of the cold temperatures, but they'll be paving next week, and that'll be substantially complete. We will not open up to the public till the lights are in. Same thing with Stewart Field. The lights are on back order. We have a letter saying they'll be in soon, but they're subject to the same COVID-related factory delays. And yesterday, there was a kickoff meeting for the library's children's reading area. Our consultants, H2M, Randy Colahan, the trustee, Mary Malgon, myself, Mr. Giovanella, and the 3 members of the H2M architectural team. So that went very well. We set up schedules, timelines, how we're going to work together, how we integrate our other village contracts that need to participate, and basically how we're going to communicate with each other and communicate things to local boards. So it's a very productive meeting. I look sorry. We've given out close to 4,000 of these folders. I'm holding inside the office on the second floor, not in the garages. These people will call, residents will call, between 500 and 600 will call, but not yet have picked up. So just a friendly reminder, if you actually sent in the request, please come and pick up these folders. If you have not sent a request, please do so. You can download the form online, you can come in the building department and pick one up. These folders are valuable. I mean, a lot of information in these folders. So I would love to hand them out to you guys.
Well, we've been working on this for 2 years. I mean, we gotta end this at some point.
The deadline is the 31st. I hope we keep that deadline.
I would suggest we do a, simple one-page mailer to every household. Let's get this done, set a deadline. You gotta ask by January 31st. If you don't pick up by March 1st, done. And we gotta get rid of this paper. This is going to be going on for 2.5 years.
The deadline is this year, 31st, December 31st.
Right. Well, I know
Do you choose to extend it?
we
or-
delayed things because of COVID and things like
Okay.
that, so. But I would just suggest we gotta finish this. Like you said, you can't have 500 folders sitting in your office, the plan was to get rid of this stuff. So,
Right.
my suggestion is we just do a simple one-page mailer to every house. Make a request by the end of the year, you gotta pick it up by March 1st, otherwise we're getting rid of it. No more extensions, we gotta get rid of this stuff.
I totally agree. I'm in right now 2 different locations. The firehouse has about 300 boxes, which in each box is about 50 to 60 folders. That's one location. The second location is Village Hall, the garage there. We actually had DPW did a great job. We built shelves there for these folders, just so we have easy access. That if people do come in, residents do come in and pick them up, we're ready to go. There's no delay. I mean, we have interns in the office delivering these folders and getting them ready for us, but it's been a slow process picking them up. So please, if you did request it, please pick them up.
I don't know anybody else feels.
Yeah, I think the mail is a good idea. You can actually have the form as part of the mail, so that way people will get the mail or just fill it out and kind of wait for the mail.
I'm sorry, say that again?
No, I said you can have the form actually be, the mailer have the form that you need to fill out, right, as part of the mailer, right? So that way the residents would then just have the mailer, and just fill in all the information that they need to drop it off at the phone.
Okay.
Well, I think he needs a little guidance from us. Is everybody on board with, let's do a mailer?
The mailing is going
Get it
to
back.
I was
cost.
gonna say, why don't we do a mailer, and like Trustee McCrary said, and put it inside the form, and, something for them to send back, it can be part of, it could be on the opposite side of the mailer, or whatever, they fill it all out and just send it in.
Yeah. So let's get out of mailer.
I agree, but there's an expense to that mailer, so we're agreeing on the expense of the mailer to be mailed out?
Well, it could be very simply, we're confusing, on this side is the explanation.
I got
On this side is the form.
No, we're confusing 2 issues, Bob. The issue we want to take care of is the files that are ready to be given to the people. In addition to that, in the same mailing, those who have not filled out a form, put the form in for them. So there's 2 things that have to be covered.
Right, but what I'm saying to you, Joe, is that rather than putting in 2 separate pieces of paper, okay, I've
No, back and front.
done hundreds of mailers in my
Back and
life.
front.
Yeah, it's back and front. On this side, you give the explanation to everyone. By the way, if you submitted a form,
Absolutely.
come pick yours up. If you hadn't submitted your folder, please complete the form on the other side. Right. On the other side, you put the form, and then they put it in an envelope before they bring it down. So like I said, it's a one-page mailer, very inexpensive, easy to do.
Cost, right? How much does
Yes.
it cost?
It's minimal. It's not.
It's minimal.
That's fine.
That's very small.
Understood. You're taken care of. Thank you.
Let's get it out, give them until December 31st, get it back to you, and pick up by March 1st, everything's gone.
Understood. Thank you.
Any further questions? At this time, I'm going to get the trustees, do they have information for us or any questions?
I actually did have one other question. Again, sorry, I don't want to be picking on you. I noticed that this past weekend we had the leaf collection happening over the weekend. I'm just questioning, is that all the time? And is there a reason why we're doing it on the weekend?
Yes. The leaf season is usually 12 weeks long. That includes overtime, usually an hour at the end of the day, because they pick up leaves they go section by section. Parks does the central, the highway does the rest of the POA. They work all day, and then the last hour is cleaning up the machine and greasing everything ready for the next day. And on weekends we do it as well. Otherwise, we would go later into the year, past the holidays and into the winter, and then you're pushing leaves with snow. So that 12 weeks is kind of like the window we've always done it. To eliminate the overtime, which they've done in the past, at previous board's request, brings it into the new year, which is not practical for a lot of reasons, especially in the winter weather. So it is overtime, but it's built into the budget.
We've done it that way over the last couple of years. We've had overtime because all of a sudden the leaves would come down the last week with the rain last week. We really need more pickup.
It's weather driven. We don't start until the leaves are substantially falling. So we don't just start a certain day. We wait till the leaves are falling.
Mayor, if I could just add one comment, adding on to Ms. Wu's report. The village put together a mailer that should be in everyone's mailbox probably Saturday, maybe tomorrow, certainly by Monday. Kind of expands on a lot of things that Ms. Wu reported on. Hopefully residents read it and understand how complex things are and how well we run this village from a fiscal standpoint. So again, hope there's copies outside. I hope people grab it, but it'll be in everyone's mailbox in the next few days.
Hey, does anyone else have anything? All right, I'd like to make a few comments. When Mrs. Wu was explaining about getting funds from the CARE Fund, I wanted to give some credit to the town of Hempstead, because I go to every Thursday morning. There's a Zoom meeting, and it is for mayors of the town of Hempstead. And we talk about what's happening during the pandemic. Are people getting enough supplies? Are people getting this? Are people getting that? And it's very, very thorough. And also it dealt with people being reimbursed for all the money that they spent for the pandemic. And we're not finished yet. But Mrs. Wu sent me an email today, and it was yesterday, I'm sorry. And she explained to me that we got, I think it was $221,000 from the town of Hempstead, because I got that through going to these meetings for mayors. And I was so thrilled to find that out, because quite frankly, when we have discussions there, we really are reaching need. We have the money, we have a lot of money that, I don't know, things just work out, as Mrs. Wu explained, that when thing gets lost, we try to find something else. So I thought that perhaps other communities might have needed it more than we did. And what happened was, I did not expect to get that money at all, but it came yesterday. Well, that's about the first time I ever got a grant or anything like that come through me, and I got such a thrill out of it, and I thought it was so good and generous. So it's good to know that, and he does, this is Don Clayton, is the supervisor there, and he does a very, very good job. And he takes especially good care of the communities that he is dealing with, who really do desperately need that money. So it was a wonderful experience for all of us, I think, to be involved with that. And I felt great that it came through the mayor's meetings every Thursday morning. Actually, it's frustrating because our board meetings are very often on a Thursday night. And then on the day that the board meeting is scheduled, things come up at the last minute, and a lot of work has to get done frenetically all of a sudden to make everything fine for the meeting that evening. And the last thing I want to do is go on to a Zoom meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning. But it really works well, and he does a very, very good job of it. I wanted to give him credit for that too. The other thing I would like to say is that we have a committee going, as you know, and the commissioner and I are on that end, and trustee Harder, and we are looking at the way we interact with people who have broken the law, or how police behave these days, because it has changed moderately. And it's been a great success so far, I think, Commissioner, don't you? That we have these meetings, we've had 4, we do a lot of conversing, reading before we come, and we are thinking carefully about going through our codes or laws and making sure that they are where they should be. And it's turning out very, very well, and we will be able to read it, and we will be able to make suggestions about what you think might be valuable there. So I just wanted you to know that the way it's structured, I've said this before, but I just wanted to repeat it, is that every facet of the community will be involved by a representative or by just coming forward and giving your opinion. And I think that we do very well, but it's good to take a look at yourself every once in a while and think about maybe changing some things or modifying some things a little bit. And so I just want you to know about that, and we will be having several other meetings, I believe, and I just wanted to keep you up to date on that. So is there anyone else among the trustees who would like to say something? If not, we are going to move on, and we are going to have citizens' comments on agenda items. Please just raise your hand if you would like to come up, give your name and address.
Well, for many of the same reasons, I think the food concession also struggled. The pool was closed every day from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock. Those are prime food concession hours. As Mrs. Wu mentioned, the pool didn't open on time. Through no fault of anyone else, they had no other choice because of the coronavirus. But I don't think it opened until after the 4th of July. Thirdly, we weren't allowed to bring in guests, or we were not permitted to bring in guests, and that also impacted the food concession stand. So I hope that when you make a decision, a determination on the rent, I hope you will consider these things. Another thing that didn't happen this year, I don't know if I'm calling it, but there was something called, I think, the Night Under the Stars. They had alcohol there, music, and Mr. Parks was able to serve food right by the pool. It was really nice. It was very well attended. I think there were 2 of those nights in 2019. There were no such nights in 2020. Finally, I would hope that you would remember that, or consider a determination that Mr. Parks is a resident of the village. He's been doing this for many years. He sold hot dogs to my children, and now he sells them to my grandchildren at the pool. So I think the longevity should count for something. Thank you.
Yes.
when in fact we have a website. Just throw it up on the website. That's what should happen. All of these meetings should be done virtually. If you look at the comments,
This is not the agenda right here.
excuse me, $10,000 was on your agenda, correct? Thank you. I read that correctly. Okay. So my whole comment is the method of communication, and in this document it says, we have meetings and nobody attends. Have it virtually. We have trials virtually. I have hearings virtually. I have depositions. So the question really is what's the purpose of this being sent to everybody instead of actually having the information that Ms. Wu had will never be heard, will never be seen. That was a presentation that the village should have seen.
Okay.
It's
Well,
recorded.
hold on a second.
And not everybody's as savvy with the computer. We put a lot of stuff on
Unfortunately,
the
I can't
website.
say it. Thank you.
I would just say two comments. Not everybody's as savvy with the website in the village as we heard. I can tell you right now, my mom's not going to be able to get on there, so the mailer does help. You might be in a much different position. And also, there's video of every meeting. I would love it if people actually watched the videos. But
nobody knows.
I know.
If you wait and
Well, I don't know.
nobody knows that these meetings are being broadcast live, or should be.
Well, I don't know that it's live, but they're posted on YouTube.
They're posted on YouTube.
So you can watch them whenever you want, which is probably even more convenient. But again, it comes back to that thing that not everybody's as savvy with the computer as you'd like them to be. Believe me, we talk about this a lot too, even within the POA. We have things in our bylaws that say you have to print and mail, you have to stamp them, you have to da-da-da. It's a tremendous amount of money. We also have to post stuff in the paper, right? And you go,
And it used to be when we
it
started
costs money.
live.
Yeah.
They had to go raise your hand and they go left. And we put turn signals on.
I agree. I think,
Mr. Torino, if I can, you answer the question. Your question was what?
No, the question is,
Well, your first question is why? That's what you said. You
Yes.
held up the paper and you said why, so I'd like to address that.
certainly.
Okay. Over the last month, which I addressed myself at a previous board meeting, there has been a lot of letters, postings, for whatever reason. And the people that were addressing these things, I'm sure they have their own agenda, but there are things that were being said that were basically presented as facts. What happened was, after I had made my statement, which I did at a previous board meeting, I don't remember if you were here at the time.
I was.
What happened was, I even received numerous telephone calls, and I don't know if other trustees have, from several residents that I've known for years, and many of them who don't watch YouTube, who don't, shall we say, stay on the cusp of technology. But what ends up happening is that they're being told by their friends, they're being told by their neighbors, they're reading the newspaper, and they're seeing all of these things that are being said. And they're calling me up, sincerely concerned about, like I said before when I spoke, people are using words like medical. When we were talking about the village, when they were talking about how is it possible that Garden City is not being devastated with COVID or anything else like that. So what happened was, and again, I've been a trustee for 8 years, I would say probably somewhere between 10 to 15 people that I've known for years called me and were extremely concerned. So what happened was is that as we sat there amongst the trustees and we talked to each other, we found out that this was happening in all of our sections and that many people were being contacted. So what we felt the best thing to do was to put that together, to take that and to send that to all the residents because, again, many people saw the comments that I made. I received many telephone calls of people saying thank you very much for straightening that out. But what I found interesting was that so many residents had not seen it, and what happened was they were still having those fears and concerns. So you may not agree with that format, or you may not agree with it. And again, once again, the $10,000 was not just for the mailing. The bottom line is also just to replenish the fund that we have. But the reality of it is that the board made a decision that in order to make sure that all the resident stores, regardless of their technological ability, whatever it might be, however, whatever their venue is of obtaining news, that they would actually see the facts. So that's the decision we made. Now again, you may agree or not disagree with it, but the very first thing you said to me, you asked the board why, and I just wanted to explain to you that's why.
It's an excellent explanation, and your explanation is the exact reason why this should in fact be online so that everybody can see what is happening and you don't get those phone calls. Because if you wind up having the ability for all the residents, whether they take the opportunity or not, there is a greater level of transparency of what happens, why it happens, and they will then have the opportunity to have that input.
Well, I still receive those questions even after my comments were put online, and I'm sure that with what we sent out to the residents, Mrs. Oldham, I would hope that this also would be put online so that the residents could see it as well, if they needed to. But like I said, people look at information in many different ways, but that's the reason why.
Well, as you said, they get their information from social media and the news. Now, if they had first-hand information, I believe, you may disagree with me, with first-hand information to observe what happened during the budget process. The second page, you indicate that nobody shows up. I know, when I was a trustee, nobody showed up either. So things don't change. But if you have more of an opportunity.
But during the budget process, understand this, we had Zoom calls. People could dial in. So, I mean, it's not like we held, we did not hold secret meetings. But these are things that we have, and unfortunately, whether it's COVID now or over the last 8 years that I've been a trustee, the reality of it is that there are very few people, unfortunately, who come to these meetings, but yet then they turn around and they say, well, I didn't know about this, or what about this, or whatever. And again, we publicize it. We have 4 nights. Each department head gets up there and talks about every line, every expenditure, everything. Questions are asked for hours and hours. And unfortunately, the same 10 to 15 residents, every once in a while you have maybe 4 or 5 people.
I'll correct you.
But
last
there aren't that many.
Last year was 6. We hit the apex of 6.
We're just trying to think of different ways to get in touch.
Yeah. I mean, the thing of it is that residents have said,
Man, every house gets
find different ways to communicate to us, so that's what we do. So we do it. We have the gentleman here who comes down, and one of the nice things, even though the acoustics isn't the best, but one of the nice things about being here is that he feels more comfortable to be able to videotape this, so that all of our meetings are videotaped. We put things online. Mrs. Wu reports it. We put things on. We now have a Facebook page. Mrs. Oldham puts everything on the website. Now we're sitting there and we're setting this out. So again, we're trying to do every single different venue that we can, so that all the residents can get the information.
As you said, each of us can disagree.
Okay.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else with comments? Right?
Well, I'd like to actually, I just want to echo, can you state your name? Sorry, Monica Highway, Huntington Road. I just want to echo Leo Stiller's comments about the refreshments at the pool, because the pool is one of the saving graces of this summer. And, DJ refreshments had no choice, the restaurants in town can do a takeout business and do various things.
minutes of November 5th executive session, and then we get November 5th, just a regular meeting. First, Mr. Macrinos, and second, Mrs. Foley, and all those in favor? And that was, that's right, that's 7-0, and motion carries. Right now, we are going to, right now we are going to take a look at external communications under the formal agenda, and we would want to realize that the gentleman who owns the concession at the pool is asking for for us to consider lowering the price of his rent, actually, if you want it in plain language. And he has given us a lot of information about what happened financially to his business during that year. And I'd like to initiate a discussion among the trustees about that. And he has asked for us to take a look at that number and see if we can lower it. So, Trustee Johnny, if you will start.
I'm in favor of this concept. I think for the reasons that various people have said, including Ms. Wu. I think, if I got this correctly, I'm looking at the budget book and the numbers, we used roughly 43% of what was expected as revenue as a result of opening late, limited hours, limited number of people, no guests, etc. I'd be in favor of reducing the rent. I believe it's about $22,000. I'd be in favor of reducing it by that to the 43% number, which is around $994. That's where I'm going.
I too feel that we should reduce that rate, and I'm not saying that we should erase it. I think we should look at it seriously. And he gave a comparative study. He did a very, very good job on the paperwork that he presented to us. And I would say that we should lower his commitment to us financially for that period of time. Does anyone have anything else to say? Trustee Goldberg?
Yeah, as I received all the rest of the information and the numbers, obviously we looked at the weeks. I know Mr. Parks is here. Mr. Parks, we wouldn't mind just coming up to the podium, just in case we have a question, we can ask you directly. But the thing of it is that, as Mr. Stilla had mentioned, the aspect of it was that the period of time that the pool was closed every single day in between when we had to do cleaning of the pool was basically a prime time as far as for lunch. In addition to that, I believe we were also closed, Mr. Squadron, for I believe 3 weeks. There were many other things that we had, and Mr. Stillman said, the aspect of not allowing guests or whatever. I know that Mr. Parks, that you had, because we basically said, why don't you give us a suggestion, or what your thoughts were is that basically whatever money that you would pay would be deferred, and that you would basically pay in next year's season instead of paying it now, which I can totally understand with cash flow, what the business is. You had also thrown out a number of around 5,000, which is what you were asking for. I will just give you my opinion, having seen all the numbers and everything else like that. I would support your suggestion. I would support your number because I think that, again, with as much that has happened with your business, which, again, as was mentioned before, you don't have the ability to do takeout. You don't have the ability to do other things like that. And, again, I'll refer back to what Mr. Stimler said, and you and I, like I said, we've known each other 20-some-odd years. Whenever you have someone who works with the village as a business, there has to be a value to the relationship between the village and that business. And I don't know of any other business in town where the person has developed that relationship more than you have. You give back to the village. The only other place that I've ever seen that to that degree is, I'll give a plug to Garden City Pizza because they do that all the time. But the bottom line is that I know you live here, but
Okay, Mr. Boulevard, and a second. Mr. Linville, and all of those in favor? That passed unanimously. Okay, now we go to the end, and we will have citizens' comments and non-agenda items. If you'd like to come up and speak to us, please raise your hand.
John Cantwell. First, have y'all talked at all about what's going to trigger you to take this back to Zoom as COVID numbers rise?
Not yet.
Okay, this is getting a little more uncomfortable as the weeks go on coming up here. And also, can we get an update on what's going on with litigation against